That's one of the many greetings that we use to greet people in Guangdonghua, Cantonese. Due to this food scarcity in our country, food has a deep emotional connection. Also, one's well-being is contingent to the community's sustenance. Food is integral in many cultures. And today, I would like to share my story to provide you a glimpse of my culture. My baba was a refugee fleeing the country to find a better life. He came to the United States as a Hoiyee with Hakka roots from Hokksan, Guangdong, China. And he worked many jobs, but he never complained of sanfu, body bitter, which is hard and laborsome. And after many, many years, he was able to acquire some land in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And with this land, he had a front yard and a backyard. And he was able to create a very supportive ecosystem that supported the family, the Hoiyee community. With this, he routed the water from the back, water retention ditches, into many little streams that wrapped and zigzagged around the property. And in one section, he had dug out and paved over with concrete to allow ducks to swim in it to fertilize the water, which flowed into all the many little streams. And then there was a second section where the water was to feed the baka, chickens, rabbits, pigs, and any other wildlife that it attracted, like roadrunners, feral cats. And in the center, he had a sprouting shed for nga toy. And the enzyme-rich waters from washing would pour into the garden. He had salt buckets scattered throughout the property, and he had fermenting piles everywhere. Everything was very much alive. And because of New Mexico sand flurries, we had planted trees along the base on the south end and a wall of trees on the west end. And we had several fruit trees, apples, plums, apricots, and he planted vegetables everywhere on the property in locations that were suitable for them from the knowledge that he had of the varieties. And in the fall, he would put in all the debris and the leaves into the stream and let them stew over the winter with the rain until the next spring, where he dredged out that soil to build the gardens. So this yard and this property wasn't very big, but it was extraordinary, the amount of food that he was able to grow for our family, the grocery stores, and the Tongan community. He was able to bring in a lot of biodiversity, lots of beetles of all different varieties, which is a sign in our culture of good soil health. Then there's grasshoppers, crickets, fireflies, which I've never seen here, and lots of birds and toads, lots and lots of toads and frogs, all in the streams. And our diet is also very diverse. We ate more than 20 different greens. That doesn't include your standard spinach and kale. And 12 to 16 different kinds of vegetables. And we also foraged a lot of wild plants, which he also cultivated and put on the property, if they were good. And we also believed that anything can be eaten. So we had lots of plants. Or mostly anything could be eaten. We weren't really picky, and none of the kids grew up very picky at all. We also believed in eating 5 flavors: sweet, sour, spicy, salty, and bitter. And believed that was very fortifying for our health. There were also my grandma, Ama, that was my primary caregiver, that was very prominent in my life. And she taught me the seasons, about the seasons, and our responsibility during the changes of the sun and the moon. She didn't use a calendar or a clock, and somehow she knew what was going on, even when a storm was coming in. From this, it taught me to harness my intuition and how important that was. To be patient and to carefully watch and feel my environment. And also the philosophy of harmony, which is to be present and not dominating. Our language, as well as in many cultures, is something that reinforces all these traditions. So it's important to speak. So when I look at my culture, I see this tapestry of wisdom, the wisdom of how to connect, how to navigate the values that are important, how to see and communicate, or even problem solve, and so much. And with life, I lost the sole contributors to my culture. My mom, my baba and mama was my constant reminder of traditions, of health, ginhong, and that was all gone. I didn't hear those voices anymore. So with so many tragedies already in my life, I just started working ridiculous hours just to focus on providing for my younger siblings. Years passed, and over time, I was subtly losing my culture. It wasn't until my daughter Nyla was born that I had this urgency to reclaim my identity and culture so I would have something to pass down to her. It gave me great sadness. But during my journey on reclaiming this culture and this identity, this foundation that I had, I realized how hard it was to hold on and to grow culture, especially in a majority culture without the presence of your family. So I want to share with you the challenges that I had in holding on and growing culture with a reflection. The first is barriers to our culture. And that is fear of being un-American, discrimination, stigma, stereotype. And through Nyla's eyes, I learned how quickly that these are learned because of microaggression, hatred, losing out on opportunities, isolation, not being valued. What if we could feel and see loud and proud, openly, in public, cultures of others? The next is not being able to access cultural resources and food. A lot of the time, people have to go to Salem and Portland to access these things. And sometimes it's not even affordable when you get there. So I've spoken to some farmers in the valley to see if we could grow some culturally specific foods. And because the demand is so low, it's not financially beneficial. And then, people of color don't have access to land. According to the National Center of Farm Workers' Health, only 5% of the land is owned by people of color. And, on the other side of the token, more than 78% of our food is grown, harvested, and processed by people of color. So, what if we had a food system that nourishes the people that grow our food rather than exploits them? The third one is the English language. We all know that the languages are very powerful in shaping our thoughts and logic. For those that don't have a lens to a second language, it's hard to see how pervasive the English language is. An example is the word weeds. I had a neighbor that told me weeds is something that you don't want. And to me, in Guangdonghua, I couldn't find a word that meant something you can decide and something you had power over and something that you can decide. The closest word we have is dato, which is mixed plants, mixed grasses, variety. And the action is mangto, which is pull the plants. In our language, not only do we speak with meaning, the words also come with a feeling. Wheeze into my core feels like hostility, vengeance. Doesn't feel good. What if we see behaviors and how people communicate in cultures of others? The next one is having cultural spaces. Culture is really complex. A lot of people think of culture as the language, the literature, the food, the basket weaving arts, all these things that are on the tip of the iceberg. But culture is much more than that. It's the notion of validity, the theory of disease, the concept of self. And it gets more complex. There's different communication styles. High context, low context. A lot of people, most often, people of color are high context communicators. So a lot of nonverbal. I wish I had the other kind of speaker. Speaking from a social, cultural kind of level. And so writing this, I had over 20 different examples, trying to grasp and encompass all my views and my feelings, and it was spiraling all over the place. It wasn't with any direct logic like this. So people from other cultures really need people that remind them of these cultures and traditions, but also to reinforce these ways, especially while we are in code switch, either because of survival or necessity. What if we had urgency to celebrate and honor cultures of others? The last one is the notion that we need to teach. And applying education, training, whatever you want to call it. A lot of times, most times, people that come have a very strong agricultural background. And when we try to educate, it stifles that knowledge that they possess, or any solution that may evolve from that. Science for the natural world, tends to compartmentalize, like carbon, compost, food waste, rather than seeing it as a whole and committing that to a relationship. It should be a relationship that is relational, synergetic, and ever evolving. My dad, my papa, created regenerative permaculture on that property. So, what if we empowered people of different cultures to be experts? As one of many things to help support culture, we created Growing Ancestral Roots. Growing Ancestral Roots is a nonprofit. It's a nonprofit that is committed to breaking down barriers, to support people of color in reclaiming or maintaining their ancestral roots. And the support is as fluid as living water, providing but not limiting seeds, access to land, funding, food boxes of cultural relevant foods, jobs, and even kinship to celebrate their cultural celebration that's important to them. But the barriers are enormous, and more has to happen. We tend to focus on saving language, saving some kind of meditative art, but what about the people? There needs to be transformative change in policies and in people's minds, and there needs to be urgency. We are losing a language every 40 days. That's 9 languages a year. And per Dan Saladino's book, Eating to Extinction, rare plants and indigenous plants all over the world are going extinct. And we used to eat 6,000 different kinds of vegetables. Now we are only eating 9 main staples. And 50% of our diet is only corn, wheat, and rice. If we continue with those and the practices, the world will be experiencing, in 7 years, 2030, a 40% deficit, a water deficit. And what that means is 50% of the world's population will be living in a high water stress area. Again, impacting mostly people of color. So how do we step out of our comfort in how we live and in how we eat with all the inspirations of these communities to create family solidarity where we are committed to one's well-being, to sustain people's dignity and sense of belonging. It is our responsibility to preserve people, and we have the power to do that. Thank you.